There is a version of happiness that looks completely convincing from the outside, and it is exhausting to maintain. You know the one. The smile that shows up on cue. The upbeat tone of voice that never wavers. The social media posts that suggest a life of constant highlights, warm moments, and zero struggle. From a distance, it looks like someone who has figured things out. But if you have ever been that person performing contentment while carrying something heavy underneath it, you know exactly how much energy that performance costs and how hollow it feels at the end of a day when you are finally alone and you do not have to pretend anymore. Today I want to talk about the difference between real happiness and the act of pretending to be happy. Not in a way that is preachy or clinical, but honestly because I think most people have done both, and most people have also encountered both in the people around them. And understanding the difference matters, not just for yourself, but for how you show up for the people in your life who might be struggling quietly. Let me start with what real happiness actually looks like, because it is often not what we expect. Genuine happiness is rarely the big, dramatic kind that appears in advertisements or movie endings. It is quieter than that. It tends to show up in small, consistent moments, a morning that starts without dread, a meal that tastes good, a conversation that feels easy and real, a task completed without the weight of anxiety pressing down on it. Real happiness is not the absence of difficulty. People who are genuinely happy still have hard days, still face problems, still feel sadness, frustration, or grief. The difference is that their baseline, the emotional ground they return to after those difficult moments, is stable and relatively peaceful. They do not need to perform for themselves. When no one is watching, they are still okay. One of the clearest signs of real happiness is consistency between public behavior and private behavior. A person who is genuinely content tends to act roughly the same whether they are with people or alone. They are not dramatically different in front of an audience. They do not need external validation to feel like things are fine because things actually feel fine from the inside. Their laughter is not louder than it needs to be. Their cheerfulness is not switched on specifically for other people. They are not working to make an impression. They are just living. Now compare that to what pretending looks like. Pretending to be happy is an active and often unconscious effort to project an emotional state that does not match the internal experience. People do this for many different reasons, and it is important to understand those reasons without judgment because most people who pretend to be happy are not doing it to deceive anyone. They are doing it to survive socially, to protect themselves from uncomfortable questions, to meet the expectations of the people around them, or simply because they do not know how to explain what they are actually feeling, or do not feel safe doing so. Some of the signs are subtle. A person who is pretending to be happy often laughs a little too quickly, or in a way that does not quite match the moment. Their positivity can feel slightly performative, like it is pointed outward at other people rather than arising naturally from within. They might avoid certain topics or redirect conversations away from anything too personal or too real. They tend to be more comfortable talking about other people's problems than their own. In quieter, less social moments, there can be a kind of flatness to them, an absence of the energy they show in public that is easy to miss if you are not paying close attention. Social media has made this significantly more complicated. Platforms that are built around sharing the highlights of a life create a natural incentive to curate a version of yourself that looks happier, more successful, and more put together than the full reality. This is not always conscious dishonesty. Sometimes it starts as simply choosing to share the good moments, which is reasonable enough. But over time, for some people, that curation becomes a separate identity that has very little to do with how they actually feel on an average Tuesday. The gap between the online version and the offline version grows, and maintaining that gap takes energy. It also creates a strange kind of loneliness, because the version of you that is getting attention and responses is not actually you. The effect of sustained pretending on mental health is real and worth taking seriously. When a person consistently suppresses or masks their genuine emotional state, the feelings that are being hidden do not disappear. They accumulate. Unexpressed emotions tend to find other outlets, through physical tension, through irritability that seems to come from nowhere, through exhaustion that sleep does not fully fix, through a general sense of disconnection from life that is hard to explain. Over time, the habit of performing happiness can make it genuinely difficult for a person to access their real feelings even when they want to, because the suppression has become automatic. They go through the motions of a life that looks fine from the outside, while inside there is a growing sense that something is off and they cannot quite name it. There is a question that comes up in conversations about happiness: whether it is possible to become genuinely happy by acting happy. The idea is that if you smile more, speak more positively, and behave as though things are good, your brain will eventually catch up and your feelings will align with your behavior. There is some genuine psychology behind this. Research does suggest that physical expressions of emotion can influence mood to some degree. Smiling, even when forced, can produce a mild shift in how a person feels in the moment. But this is a very limited effect, and it is not a substitute for addressing the actual sources of unhappiness. Performing happiness over a genuine problem does not solve the problem. It delays the reckoning. And the longer the reckoning is delayed, the heavier it tends to be when it finally arrives. Culture plays a significant role in how happiness is expressed and how much pressure people feel to perform it. In cultures that place a high value on social harmony, emotional restraint, or presenting a composed face to the world, people may suppress negative emotions not because they are ashamed of them, but because expressing them feels socially inappropriate or burdensome to others. In cultures that are more emotionally expressive, there may be pressure in a different direction to show enthusiasm, positivity, and energy in ways that feel exhausting for people who are naturally more reserved. Neither extreme is entirely healthy. What matters is whether a person has access to spaces and relationships where they can be honest about how they actually feel without consequence or judgment. Relationships are central to this conversation. Real happiness is almost never sustained in complete isolation. Humans are social beings, and meaningful connection, the kind where you feel genuinely known by at least one or two people, is one of the most consistent factors associated with lasting well-being. But the quality of the connection matters enormously. Relationships where you feel pressure to perform, where vulnerability is met with dismissal, or where honesty is not safe, do not contribute to real happiness. They contribute to more pretending. The relationships that actually support genuine happiness are the ones where you can say something is hard without being immediately told to look on the bright side, where you can admit you are struggling without worrying that the other person will panic or pull away, and where the connection feels the same on good days and difficult ones. Money comes up in almost every conversation about happiness, and the honest answer is complicated. Financial stability, having enough to meet your basic needs without constant anxiety, does contribute meaningfully to well-being. The stress of not knowing whether you can afford food, medicine, or a safe place to live is genuinely damaging to mental health, and addressing that stress through financial stability is a real form of improvement. But beyond a certain threshold of basic security, the relationship between money and happiness becomes much weaker than most people expect. More money does not consistently produce more happiness. What it can produce is more options, more security, and more freedom, and those things can support happiness when they are used well. But they are not the same as happiness itself. Self-acceptance is perhaps the most underrated factor in genuine happiness, and the one that is hardest to develop. A person who accepts themselves, including the parts that are difficult, imperfect, or inconvenient, does not need to maintain a performance. They do not need to hide the unflattering parts of their life or their personality, because those parts are acknowledged rather than denied. Self-acceptance does not mean being satisfied with everything or giving up on growth. It means starting from a position of basic okayness with who you actually are, rather than constantly measuring yourself against an idealized version that you have not yet become. If you are someone who has been pretending for a long time, the path towards something more genuine is not dramatic. It starts with small moments of honesty, with yourself first, and then carefully with one or two people you trust. It starts with noticing the difference between how you feel and how you present yourself, without judgment about that gap. It starts with allowing yourself to have a difficult day without immediately trying to correct it into something more acceptable. And it continues slowly through the practice of letting what is real on the inside become at least sometimes visible on the outside. That is not easy, but it is worth it because the life you are actually living is always more interesting and more meaningful than the one you are performing. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, subscribe to help me hit my 2,000 video goal. This is my unfiltered diary of solo living in the Philippines, from the tough days in the ESL classroom to my journey learning Japanese and Korean. Yes, I'm still a beginner. If you'd like to support my work and my retirement fund, check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update. Thanks for being part of the journey.
See you then.